Wonderful. Welcome back. I'm really excited for this session. We've had an amazing overview of wastewater policies across the globe, and now we're going to focus in to look at some case studies. We have a very diverse regional perspective coming from South America, the US, and Europe. And I think importantly from this session, it's an opportunity to look more at the granularity of some of the policies that are implemented and see what kind of lessons learned we can glean from these diverse case studies, which is the real purpose of the Rosenberg Forum, sharing experiences, exchanging dialogue, and coming together to think about a better way forward, especially as we think about water quality and ensuring access to clean and safe water to society. So with that focus in mind, I am extremely excited to introduce our speakers today. We have three esteemed speakers. I am going to give an abbreviated version of their bios as I introduce our speakers at the start of our session. Detailed bios are in the workshop materials that were circulated prior to the meeting. Each presentation will be 20 minutes. We'll have 10 minutes for Q&A, and following the three presenters, we'll have an opportunity for a group dialogue facilitated by Lucia and Eric. So with that, our first speaker today will be Guillermo Donoso. He is a professor in water law and management in the Department of Agricultural Economics at Catholic University of Chile. His research focuses on understanding and modeling decision-making with respect to water resource management and allocation, with an emphasis on institutions and governance, and also economic policy instruments such as water markets, water pricing, and water affordability. His presentation title is Challenges and Regulatory Proposals for the Reuse of Treated Wastewater in Chile. Second, we have a remote presenter joining us, Mr. Christian Minelli. He is head of the Secretariat at the Italian Regulatory Authority for Energy, Networks, and Environment, ARNA, where he has worked since 2010. In this role, Mr. Minelli advances European and international institutional relations on energy and water utility services regulation at the multilateral and bilateral levels and assists ARNA's board members in those discussions. Since 2014, he is also the general coordinator for WAREG, the first European association of national and regional agencies responsible for economic regulation of drinking water and wastewater services. His presentation is titled The Role of Water Regulations in the Implementation of Water Legislation in EU Member States. Our third presenter, Andrea Gerlach, comes to us from the University of Arizona, where she is the director of the Udall Center for Studies in Public Policy and also a professor in the School of Geography, Development, and the Environment. Her research focuses on cooperation and conflict in water governance, including questions of equity and access, institutional change, learning, and adaptation. Andrea has more than 2 decades of experience leading interdisciplinary environmental study programs and university community environmental partnerships. Her presentation today is titled Forever Chemicals and Wastewater Challenges in the United States, with a look at Tucson, Arizona. So welcome, speakers. Thank you for taking the time to present today. And I will transition the floor to Guillermo.
The presentation today is based on a research project that we conducted at the Water Law and Management Center, led by Daniela Rivera, and also counted with the participation of Maria Molinos, who's accompanying us today, and Oscar Mello. So the talk will be based on three great big sectors. First, the background and what are the present circumstances on treating wastewater in Chile. Then the main challenges that we have identified for the reuse of treated water. And based on that, some of the recommendations that we are proposing to advance the reuse of treated water. The first thing that is important to have as a data is in Chile, our high coverage of both sewer systems and wastewater treatment. This is urban sector, and this is not only the urban sector, it is in the territory that the operators have under concession. You have urban areas that are outside because of growth of the territory, and therefore they do not have this coverage. Rural sector is a completely different picture, which we will not touch in this presentation. Only 58% coverage in drinking water and a lack of sanitation in that area. So we have throughout the country over 90% in most of the cities of sewer systems and 100% of treatment of the collected water. So when we talk of coverage of wastewater treatment, we're talking of the amount that is collected. So for example, in Valparaiso, you have 94% of coverage in sewer systems, 100% of wastewater treatment, but there's an important percentage that is not being collected. How did we get there? In 1993 to 1999, our operators were mainly public, 95% were public. At that time, we already had a very good coverage of drinking water, 99.3, also of sewage, but in wastewater treatment, we were way behind, 16%. In those years, our population suffered significantly from typhoid, cholera, because of the untreated water. So we needed to increase significantly the investment. And that's when the new law, 1998, was passed, where operators were under concession, and that's when the private sector came in. The country privatized, fully privatized 8 water operators, but 98% of those not privatized are operated by private companies. We do have one municipal company that is operating, and here's an important issue. Municipal or private are subject to the same regulation. So being public does not leave you out of the strict regulations. So what happened, basically, we went from 16.7% treatment of wastewater to 99.8%. And that's because we increased the financing. How did we increase the financing? Full cost recovery. And in the urban sector, we have, for many years, a full cost recovery, long-term marginal cost recovery, not short-term. So this is the evolution. It gives you a picture of how we increase the coverage over time, and we have the different treatment systems. The most important is activated sludge. What is the volume of treated water in all of our urban sector? We're talking of over a billion cubic meters of water per year in total in the complete country. Not only is it a significant amount, it has a characteristic which is extremely important because it's not seasonal. So the volume of treated water is constant through, or it has some seasonality, but not compared to the natural flow. So it is a more secure supply of water. What is the destination of our treated wastewater? We have 21% on marine outfalls. 73% are discharged into continental water bodies, rivers, and maybe some lakes. And we only have 5% of direct reuse of treated water. Now, going back to the 73%, it's reused because it's discharged into river systems and therefore reused mainly by agriculture or downstream. So that 73% is not a new source of water. Typically in Chile, they say we're not reusing treated water, it's a new source. Only the sea outfalls would be really a new source. What is the direct reuse? 21% in agriculture, 2% in mining, reuse within the treatment plants, and 73% is not classified. This is only of the 5% of direct reuse. This is the volume per region. Clearly, the Metropolitana, Santiago, that has 8 million people, which is almost half of the population of the country, and that's why we have a spike there. And in terms of reuse, you can see that in the north, we have a higher percentage of direct reuse, and that is clearly motivated by the high level of scarcity in that area. Regulatory compliance with discharges to continental waters is very high. Now here, a caution in these numbers, we are way behind in what we call secondary water quality standards. We have primary quality standards for health, but for ecosystems and environment, we only have maybe 10% of our rivers with those standards. So this is satisfying the quality established by our environmental agency for the discharge. So we have a high compliance on the quality. Now, here's an issue that has been brought up in the previous presentation, which is the contaminant, emerging contaminants. And this is a study conducted by Salazar et al., where they sampled water in the Mapocho River. The Mapocho River is the river that crosses Santiago. It is one of the sources of water. And he analyzed the contaminants, the emerging contaminants, in several points. The first one, A, here on the right-hand side, is before the water treatment plant. Sorry, that's not correct. It's before the abstraction of water by the potable drinking water. So this is the water in the river that is coming into the treatment plant for potabilization. D is the tertiary effluent. It's the quality of the effluent of the plant. And E is once it has mixed with the Mapocho River, what is the quality? Some issues before the intake for the potable water company, you have pesticides in a higher percentage. You have also pharmaceutical compounds previous to the city. That's because you have rural and very low dense areas previous to that water intake. And you have also drugs of abuse. And you can see that the drugs of abuse are fairly similar in the three sampling areas. The number of detections increases, and this is a symptom of an increasing problem in our country and probably in others. Some of the drugs of abuse that are detected are fentanyl, heroin, and a couple of others. So that's a sign of a significant problem. But the main other issue is the increase in the pharmaceutical. As you can see, it significantly increases as water passes through the city. So what's our current legal framework? Mansour's presentation talked of fragmentation. That's an understatement for our country. This is just an example of policies that are related to water quality and therefore have an incidence on water reuse. The significant ones, you have our water code, you have a new law on the reuse of gray water, which recently has its new ruling. Here, just a parenthesis, that law has very stringent quality standards for reuse, more stringent than the discharge of effluents from the treatment plants. So when they're talking of irrigating with gray water, the standards are significantly higher than what we are irrigating with at present. So that's an issue that requires a little more reflection. This shows that we do not have enough regulation. These are the new bills under discussion. As you can see, we have several from 2008 to the present. This last one, on the right-hand side underneath, are the requirements, a proposal for quality requirements of wastewater discharge on marine outfalls. And this imposes, if it is approved, that 30% of the discharge has to be reused. Now, the marine discharges are 26%, so we have a significant source of water in that type of treatment. What are the main challenges? On the left-hand side, cross-cutting, which are challenges for the water sector in general, lack of comprehensive and updated information on water supply, water extraction, water quality. So it's difficult to manage water in that situation. Highly fragmented and dispersed institutional framework, no planning instrument, national or basin level, a low coverage, as I mentioned, of secondary water quality, and a lack of political prioritization. In terms of reuse, you have an absence of specific and systematic regulation aligned with the water code for the sanitation services. So we're talking of reuse. It has its own legislation separate from the water code. A big question in our country is who has the right to use the treated water? And that is significantly important in the continental discharges. Because since we have discharged water historically, previous without treatment, now with treatment, farmers downstream have used that water historically. So if you try to use it directly planned, you have a sector of the economy that will be with a lower possibility of income. So you have social costs, you have social benefits, but you also have to account for the investment costs. So passing from indirect of quality treated water to direct is an issue that I think has to be assessed properly. It's not always that positive. Who covers the additional treatment costs? This is mainly in marine outfalls. We have, as I mentioned, full cost recovery. Marine outfalls satisfy environmental standards. So if I want to reuse it, I have to increase the treatment. So one of the easy way out is, the urban sector has to increase their tariffs. But then the urban sector says, well, I already satisfy standards, so why should I finance? So there's a large debate. There's a lack of periodic updates of the water quality standards, and there's an issue with social and cultural acceptance. So what are some of the recommendations? First, we recommend focus on marine discharges, because the political debate on who has the right to use water is a debate that we will continue to have over the years, and we will not be able to advance. That is not an issue in marine outfalls. Modification and adjustment to the Supreme Decree 90 of 2000, which is the quality of water and what the discharge has to satisfy. And we also consider that you have to start considering emerging contaminants. Norma Chilena is the specific use standards. So if you want to irrigate in agriculture, what are the standards? These have to be revised also to be able to increase at least marine outfall reuse. And there's an issue with effective communication and information. Thank you.
Questions?
Thank you so much for the talk. I have a question. I also come from a Latin American country, and my question is, which will be the main subject that a Latin American country in this case should focus to start with? Because a lot of the issues that you mentioned happens in a lot of Latin American countries. So which one is like the main important? Is it to organize the laws or to invest in basic treatment or in scholarship the population? Which one will be? Or a combine of many also?
If your country is similar to ours, the short term, you should focus on investing on treatment to increase the water quality of the effluents. I mentioned that just as an example. Our latest reform of the water code took 12 years of debate in Congress. So if your country is similar to ours, where water is an issue that is debated for many years, you will continue having problems. So focus initially, I would suggest, on investment, where you have to find the model that will be able to obtain the financing necessary for it. Ahí está plenty.
Okay. Guillermo, thank you for mentioning something very important, indirect reuse. I think that we should avoid the double counting because there is some sort of schizophrenia. So in Spain, in the hydrological plans of Guadiana, the scarce areas, is forbidden the reuse water unless you substitute water right for another one. That was in the first and the second plan, but suddenly somebody forget it, and some water reuse is done in the middle of Guadalquivir or in the middle of the Tagus River or whatever, when in theory it's in the environmental flow. If you take it out, you will need to put something in the river to substitute the water you are taking. So it's very important because it's the first time it's mentioned. In the Article 15 of the European directive is not mentioned. It's mentioned that you should consider the nitrogen and phosphorus you are putting into the plant, but it's not mentioned. It's not mentioned if you are taking out water from the environmental flow. They forget it always, as always. No? So it's very important that we talk about the indirect use and the water rights. I'm very happy that to put it. And the other thing is, well, it's a political decision. The water quality is a political decision. The new water directive is going to increase the water quality. So the tertiary treatment will be internalized by the urban user in 5 years. Carlos can correct me. No? So the political discussion in Europe already is clear. Big cities should internalize this cost, so the farmer will have the cost at zero in the gate of the urban waste treatment plant because it will be internalized. So that is a political decision. It's not a technical decision. And the last thing is surprised me. 50% of Chile water go into inland. I mean, I thought that you were a coastal country and 90% of the population live in the seaside. No, really, it surprised me. It's a very surprising number.
We are a very long country, 4,200 kilometers long and narrow, on average 250 kilometers. Most of our population is in the Central Valley. So you have coastal cities, but the large portion of our population is between the coastal range and the Andes in the Central Valley. So that's why we have it so much inland discharge.
Yeah, thank you very much. It was a very interesting presentation. So what is the status of the industrial wastewater, particularly how much industry is, I'm not familiar with Chile's industrial sector, and so how do they perform in terms of particularly the wastewater treatment and its disposal?
In terms of the industrial, you have most of our industries that are not mining and large forestry industries are within the urban sector. So there are specific standards for industrial wastewater discharge to the sewer system. And that aims at not affecting the capacity of the treatment plant. So the industry has to pre-treat its water. Mining companies have strict standards in their environmental permits, and the large forestry also. There's an issue if they comply or not, but the standards are there.
This is a short question. How is the public perception towards water use in Chile? Is it good or bad?
If you talk about reuse, in general, you will have a negative perception, which is interesting because we reuse water anyway, 70% of the treated water. But that's not within their mind framework. So when you talk about irrigating agriculture with reused water, they will say, no, there's a health issue. But they have historically eaten vegetables irrigated. So it's an issue, but it's magical thinking that we do not drink or eat with treated wastewater.
Thank you.
Thank you, Guillermo. Just maybe related to like the public and private sector in Chile. I know that private at least had invested a lot. And how do you evaluate this experience in terms of like public versus private? And in the mosaic that you showed us with this regulation and with this unclarity in roles and responsibilities and regulations, how private can be managed?
That's a very good question. Within the sanitary sector, you have the sanitary law, the tariff law, and the concession law. And those are clear for the private sector. They have legal security of their investments. The tariff law establishes that you have full cost recovery and an assured rentabilidad, return of at least 7%. On average, you can see 8%, 8.5% returns. So cost recovery is effective. There's an issue that we're not estimating the correct tariff. So that they have the security to invest. With respect to the municipal, they are obliged to comply with the same standards. Therefore, they have to do the investments that are required. So if you're municipal, you will look for your funds from the tariffs. There is an issue which I think is important. Typically, we associate private operations with increases in tariff. The increases in tariff is when you move to full cost recovery, not because of the private sector. The private sector requires full cost recovery. So that's an issue to clarify that I think is important. There are many challenges that they face, but I think that answers your question.
Yeah, just kind of an add-on to the same question or similar theme with the incentive for private providers to continue maintenance on a longer-term basis. How can you sort of ensure that's through legislation, or because yeah, it's a problem that's sometimes faced.
Our tariff is set for a 5-year period. So every 5 years, there's a revision of the tariffs. Now, the tariff setting is based not only on the costs of operating and maintenance that they have at present, they have to present a development plan for 15 years, which takes into account the necessary investments to satisfy water demand, considering population growth. If those investments are approved by the regulator, they are then put into the tariff system. So companies are always trying to show greater investments that are really necessary. That's where the regulator has to look at it carefully. But with the incremental long-term look, you're ensuring, theoretically, the investments. But there are maintenance issues, and there are other issues that are signals that our tariff system is not giving the proper signals. For example, the tariff setting, if I recall, Maria, it's a 15% non-revenue water. However, average non-revenue water is 35%. So if you're able to operate with returns when your model was set for 15%, there's an issue there that has to be taken into account. But the idea is a development plan that has the investments necessary.